Munyika yedu yatinayo vanhu vari kubviswa panzvimbo dzavanogara. Chisumbanje vanhu vanotorerwa minda. Muno munharaunda vanhu vanotorerwa munda. Ndakazwa kuti gata wava kuzotorera futi vanhu pavanofudzirapo kuti ape mukadzi wake. Hakuna izvozvo.
Soro wa mbuya wako.
Nyuana babai, dimi magaramba kuderera mashoku, zinodiwana musiki, chonaika, chadanika.
Wandifunga makabona bari maroero wandikaitwa ndisina kupfeka ndakasungirwa chidhina uku amoziya but vanoramba kuti atirove pandiri vakandiponda wani vakandiuraya nanhasi handisi murume akakwana so zvinhu zvinomborwadza so nanhasi izvezvi vanhu vakutanga vana vana mufaro zvamuri kuona vana mufaro vana
mutengo wehuku wakutenga sai mutengo wehuku wakutenga sai mutengo weimba ndo yawe mutengo weimba ndo yawe migwagwa yawe makuru migwagwa yawe makuru uni kumusha uni kutuloka time kumusha time kutuloka chonaika santanyika.
On this, the free talk.
In this election, the law has been used more than in any other election that we have witnessed in Zimbabwe. We have seen, just even at the point of nomination court, legal disputes. Other political parties trying to block other candidates from entering the race using the law, and others trying to find a way back into the contestation space using the law. We've also seen a lot of human rights abuses happening, and the police playing a center stage as referee. In other ways rather, they have been accused of being unfair. Now we are going to be discussing in this edition of this, the Free Talk, the law, the people, and the election. At the center of it, we are going to put human rights at the core, getting into power with or without the respect of human rights. Is this the Zimbabwe that we want? Now this is the Free Talk. With me, your host as usual, Dara Blessed Mhlanga. Join me after this break in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Now Welcome back to this, The Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. This is The Free Talk here on HSTV. And this evening I'm joined by one man from Harare, whose task or his dedication is to fight and defend human rights in Zimbabwe, to uphold the constitution and to defend its tenets, to ensure that Zimbabwe enjoys full constitutional democracy. Many would know him for his attempt to stop the extension of Chief Justice Luke Malaba's extension of office. His name is Musa Kika, the man who attempted to kick Justice Malaba out of office. Thank you, Musa Kika, for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Blessed. Thank you so much, and good evening, viewers.
Beautiful. We meet Musa Kika, at a time where we are just 43 days before an election. And the chief issues that have been discussed are human rights. And you, as the director of the Human Rights NGO Forum, you've been documenting some of these issues. Now, I want us to talk about this, Musa, the human rights situation in Zimbabwe at the moment.
Absolutely. From what we have been recording over the years, over the decades, you notice that the trends are such that every time we have an election, every 5-year cycle, you see that the graph of human rights violations, particularly civil and political rights, it spikes right around the poll date. This is consistent throughout, right? Yes, you have socio-economic violations, but it's mostly civil political rights violations that spike each time we go to political contestation. So currently what we are recording as the highest violation since January, and these are trends since January to about end of June, and in the last weeks of July also, the first weeks of July, you are witnessing, number one, threats to violence. That's the number one kind of violation that is being recorded. Number two, assault, right? Beatings. That's the number two violation we are recording. The third is to do with disruption of freedom of assembly, right? Infringements to do with freedom of assembly. These are the top 3 violations that we have been recording since January. What you notice is that elections in Zimbabwe have for the most part been fought on the basis of infringement of human rights, right? Political players, political protagonists and antagonists usually seek to step into office using violation of human rights, right? Driving fear among the populace, driving people towards thinking and acting in certain ways, abusing institutions of state that are supposed to display fidelity to the law and to the constitution and to those alone, actual beating, right? In the past, we have recorded disappearances, we have recorded abductions, we have recorded torture, we have recorded murder in the run-up to elections and immediately after polls, right? This seems to be the basis upon which people seek to step into political office in Zimbabwe, which is really wrong, because elections are a moment to exercise our freedoms, right? Our freedoms per our constitution, freedoms which we fought for, right? One man, one vote, being given the right to determine who governs you, right? Who is in leadership in your particular country. Unfortunately, that's really not the case by our assessments.
You speak about freedoms that we fought for, Musa, yeah. and those who are in office are those who are in the trenches, and they have given themselves that power to say that because they went to war, they know democracy, they fought for it, and you can't teach them. In fact, in Gweru, President Emerson Mnangagwa said, those who were denying us democracy want to teach us democracy. And how do you balance that?
That's, my view is that was an unfortunate thing to say. You see, throughout history, there are those who start out very well with good intentions, right? On the basis of freedom, liberation, wanting to liberate. But once one steps into, you know, the era that they were fighting to be in, you find that they then, you know, do that which they are bored, that which they were fighting, right? Chinua Achebe in his book, Entities of the Savannah, speaks about, you know, imitators, just imitators, you know, of the colonial, you know, attitudes and practices. And we find ourselves having people who behave far worse than they who were colonizing us, who were subjugating our rights back then, right? So it doesn't mean that when one is a freedom fighter, automatically they become a democrat. They are good at observing human rights. Sometimes they use those very same tactics that were used in colonial times. We see it in Zimbabwe right now, in terms of the fear-mongering, in terms of oppression of civil and political rights, freedom of assembly violations, freedom of association violations, use of lawfare. Those are colonial era tactics. Then democracy itself, it evolves. Human rights themselves, they evolve. Our understanding of human rights expand over time as practices and experiences change, as we are becoming more alert to new dimensions of human rights norms. So you can't say no one can teach you democracy. We learn from each other. So in my view, that's an unfortunate position to take.
Now, we just in the past week, we saw the assault of Obeisha, a lawyer, and a colleague that you've worked with in terms of defending human rights. What does this do to the human rights defense and fight?
Yeah, the assault of Obey was quite unfortunate. I got a call that evening from one of my colleagues alerting me. I went to Avenue's clinic where he was admitted. I saw him. It was a very bad sight to behold. But what Obey's case illustrates is what we have been saying all along. You know, the absence of human rights, the targeting of human rights defenders. He's a human rights defender. He's a lawyer doing his work, right? But we see targeting of those who have committed to fighting for the advancement of the rights of all. Where we are supposed to be contesting based on shared humanity, shared dignity, constitutional values, legal systems, we are contesting using violence and brutality, right? What those who perpetrated that were seeking to do was to silence him, but also send a message to everyone else to say, this is what we can do to you, or we will do to you if you dare raise your voice, exercise your constitutional right, and represent your clients.
But
or defend human rights.
Someone would then argue that right now we're sitting here on Free Talk and we are raising our voices. That just means that this government allows freedom of expression, doesn't it?
So rights are not meant to be allowed. They are meant to be demanded and claimed, right? No one is given rights freely on a silver platter. You claim them. We are here because we are claiming our rights, right? Another one would not be here because they would self-censor. They would be scared. But for us, we are claiming and demanding our rights. What we are doing is, there's nothing illegal. In terms of our constitution, we are allowed to do what we are doing. What we decry is that this kind of free exchange, free talk, is not widespread in our country, right? There are stations, TV, radio stations, that we can't have this conversation we are having. That's a problem, where we can't talk about separation of human rights, civil and political rights, freedoms towards elections, right? You and I know that this kind of exchange is not commonplace. There are papers that when you read, where elections and human rights are spoken about, they are spoken about in a particular dimension, right, which really is not conducive to free exchange of ideas, maximum expression and enjoyment of freedoms. It's a quest that we continue to pursue. And unfortunately, practices and attitudes in this country don't really conduce to a situation where we can say we are absolutely free to say and act as we please.
There's been a debate on the Robert Mugabe era and the Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa era in terms of human rights violations, especially during elections. And the Second Republic, as it has called itself, has said that it has opened up more space, allowed more freedoms, and there is less violence, or there is no violence as they go to elections. Would you contend, if not, you could share some statistics or some examples?
Yeah. Afrobarometer is, and the Mass Public Opinion Institute have just released their recent survey on Zimbabwe. And when you look at the figures on fear, the data says there is more fear now of violence towards elections than there was in 2018 towards those elections, right? The 2013 elections had the least levels of fear of violence. 2018 is what it was a bit higher. 2023 elections, it has spiked. That says something. It's not spiking out of nowhere, right? You look at issues of use of the law, right? Lawfare, regressive law reforms. We are entering into an election now with two very distasteful bills currently before the president for his signature, the PVO Amendment Bill and the Patriot Bill, the so-called Patriot Bill, kinds of legislation that we don't aspire to see in a budding constitutional democracy like ours. We are getting into this election in the backdrop of the murder, by the armed forces of 6 people after the 2018 polls, which murders have not been resolved. We are entering into this election at the backdrop of the 2019 fear protest crackdowns, where people died, where people were arrested, detained, etc. And many violations that we are seeing at the moment. We are entering into this election with a lot of propaganda and hate speech. So if you are to compare now and then, there was a lot of rhetoric, when the so-called Second Republic came into office. But unfortunately, that rhetoric, promises, whether genuine or not, those promises have not been met by actual practice on the ground. My own assessment is that we are in perhaps a far worse situation than we were, say, in 2018, unfortunately. But also, we are really not comparing what we would call the best standards of democratic practice. First Republic, Second Republic, we are not comparing what we would call or we would want to accept as a standard that we want to aspire to.
You spoke about the PVO bill and the Patriot bill, which await the president's signature to become law. I want to draw attention to the Patriot Act bill. What are the issues that you're worried about in that bill?
Yeah, the Patriot Bill, these are amendments to the Criminal Code, Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act, seeking to introduce a particular sections. And one of the sections that is being sought to be introduced is Section 22A, I believe, which is called willfully injuring the sovereignty and national interests of Zimbabwe. That bill, in my view, that particular clause, is the worst kind of legislation that we have ever had since independent Zimbabwe, 43 years of our independence. It's the most calculated, most widespread, most extensive assault on our constitutional rights. Basically, it claws back, takes away what the Constitution allows, right? Targeting in particular 2 things, freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. There are certain principles at law that must be followed when we are legislating. Number one, we need to abide by the Constitution. We need to follow the Constitution as the lead, as the supreme law. Number two, a law should meet what we call the tenets of the principle of legality. It should not be overly broad. It should be precise enough, right? It should be capable of full understanding of what its contours or its outer limits are. When you read this so-called Patriot Bill, it's as broad, as ambiguous as law as you would ever find. Reason being, it's simply targeted to silence, simply targeted to shape narrative. So you and I won't be able to say certain things. You and I won't be able to engage actors outside the boundaries of our country to talk about happenings in our country. right? That's a limit of freedom of speech. That's a limit of freedom of association. And that's shaping narratives, right? To where you find a situation where only the government is able to engage with the outside world and speak of what's happening here.
But we do elect governments to speak on our behalf with the outside world. So
when we do that, we don't give away our rights, right? Government governs by our consent. But when we do that, we don't give away our rights, right? We remain the repository of that power. Our constitution is very clear that all power to govern comes from the people, legislative, executive, judicial power. And when we give consent to a government to govern us, we don't give away we retain our rights to free speech, to engage with the outside world, to engage with the free world, to engage with each other. We don't give away our rights, and no government has the authority to take away that right from us.
Some argue that this is a necessary piece of legislation, especially given that the civil society, which you also represent, has been calling for sanctions against its own country, has been soiling the image of Zimbabwe. And as a result, this has led to capital flight from this country, regression, and this has hit the poor hard. Now, you are guilty, according to government, of doing these things. Now, why do you do these things?
Yeah, what bad governance does is that it refuses to take responsibility, and it finds strawmen to apportion blame to, right? In this country, everyone is to blame except our government. You journalists are to blame because you write things which are negative. The opposition is to blame. Civil society is to blame. Businesses are called economic saboteurs, labor movements, churches. Everyone is to blame except those who are governing. Surely you will tell me that's an abnormal situation, isn't it? Someone is trying to apportion blame elsewhere and not look at themselves, right? The same with civil society. What civil society does, civil society serves three main functions. Number one, it allows for the people to self-organize and self-govern, right? From grassroots all the way to national level. Number two, civil society is a partner to government, supporting and partnering with government in pursuing our own development agendas, right? Number three, holding our government to account, right? Calling each other to account. When it comes to these first two, it seems everything is okay, particularly when we are partnering with government. But when it comes to us monitoring what government is doing, calling them to account, right? Pushing for transparency and accountability, it becomes a problem. That's where the labeling starts. You are not patriots. You are detractors. You are soiling the image of the country, etc. Simply because when there are human rights violations, we tell each other that this is not right. You are violating the Constitution. When there is corruption, we call each other out and we say, you are stealing. You can't do this, right? When you do that, when you point to the ills, to the wrongs that we are doing as a society, we are not soiling the image of the country.
Government appears not to have a problem with you calling out corruption, with you calling out human rights abuses. They have a problem with you going on the international stage where there's a regional summit or international summit. You go there, you demonstrate, you chant slogans and bring in banners that demean the government.
Yeah, I'm not sure that is factual. I'm not sure any of us have been to international platforms with banners, chanting slogans, and I'm not sure that's factual. I know there's a lot of propaganda about that. I'm not sure that is factual, so I don't think I will delve much into that. But when it comes to participating at international fora, this is a global village. Human rights norms are universal, right? Zimbabwe is a signatory to regional and international treaties and conventions. Zimbabwe is a part of the family of nations. We participate in SADC platforms, African Union platforms, United Nations platforms, right? And it's our right to do so. So when we go and participate together with other CSOs, global CSOs, right, we are doing so to advance our collective human rights as a people, regionally, globally, nationally, right? Just like the government also sits in the family of nations, right? So our participation there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's required. We are supposed to do that. our participation there must not be taken to be us soiling the image of the country. That's not how we participate there. Some organizations like us, for instance, at the forum, we have observer status with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. We go there, we participate. Our government is also there in those very sessions that we participate. And there is an exchange, right? As a people, as African people, governments, citizens, civil society. One thing that I must explain is that civil society is citizens who self-organize. These are not some entities that fall from Mars or that come from some foreign entity, countries or places. These are citizens.
But as you say this, Musa, you're funded by, by the Western world, which, according to our government, is hostile against them. You receive money from the United States of America, which has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. You receive money from the Swedes, from EU, and they, as government, say that these people are out to effect regime change and reverse the land reform program. Yeah. So you are agents of that, aren't you?
Then our government is also an agent of the West, because our government receives funding from the European Union, our government receives funding from the Americans, our government receives funding from the Swedes, and from all of those countries you have mentioned. So if we are agents of the West, our government is also an agent of the West, right? What development support does is that it's there to pursue global development agendas, it's there to pursue universal norms of democracy, constitutionalism, and human rights, right? But let's take a few steps back. Our government is supposed to be funding our own human rights agenda. Our government is supposed to be funding civil society here, but it doesn't, right? It doesn't, maybe because it doesn't see the need to. It doesn't, maybe because it squanders the money elsewhere, etc., etc. Because governments take the priority seat, the front row seat in terms of supporting its civil society. Government must. Civil society is recognized constitutionally, right? So when our government doesn't do that, civil society must still exist, because no constitutional societies can exist effectively without civil society, right? We tap into development support which is available from sovereign states, right? Their development agencies, from multilateral bodies like the UN, African Union. We tap into whatever resources are available. But whatever we are pursuing through that support is exactly what the government is pursuing. It's in the interest of our collective development. Look at this country. Social protection, for example. The bulk of social protection in Zimbabwe is unfunded, right? The smallest component is funded by government. The biggest funded component is funded by development support. Whether you are talking about malaria prevention, HIV and AIDS prevention, whether you are talking about child mortality, whether you are talking about food aid, etc., etc., development support. And no government can stand without that, particularly a country like us where there is limited fiscal space, where we have budgetary constraints, coupled with many other ills such as corruption, etc., etc. Without that, even government itself would not have been able to achieve some of the things that we celebrate the government to have achieved today.
Now, what does the restriction of civil society space and all these laws that we're talking about, you call it lawfare, what does it do in the freeness, the fairness, and the credibility of an election?
You see, civil society or civic space is that space which allows citizens to freely express themselves, to organize, to mobilize, and to participate effectively. You just don't want participation, you want effective participation. You remove that space, you are not going to have free citizens. Without free citizens, you are not going to have citizens exercising their free agency. So whatever legitimacy you think as a government you would have derived from the polls is tainted legitimacy. In other words, you are an illegitimate government, right? But you want empowered citizens. I would not want to preside over a disempowered citizenry. I want empowered citizens, right? Because an empowered citizenry equals to development. Whether you're talking about economic development, social development, political development. So you have hindered development at the end of the day if you don't have an empowered citizens. You cannot have an election that is deemed to be free, fair, credible, without citizens participating freely, right? Citizens have political rights. They have many other rights that they have. And if you limit their ability to participate, you are tainting the credibility of that election, the freeness and the fairness of that election. Unfortunately, that is almost inevitable given what we are seeing at the moment.
Now, this has given rise to other people and other schools of thought saying that it's better to boycott polls because of all these things that you have spoken about. Actually, they remove the freeness, the credibility, and make sure that the playing ground is skewed. What is your view in terms of that argument?
Yeah, there is no consensus when it comes to election boycotts. What I would say is in a normal democracy where things work, a boycott is an important form of protest. It conveys a message that everything is not okay, and it gets those who have conscience and who have the power to act and to act properly to restore the situation to normalcy, but not here. I don't believe election boycotts would work here for several reasons. Now, firstly, when the electoral playing field is manipulated and is skewed towards the incumbent, part of that I would like to believe is motivated by wanting to push everyone out, wanting people not to participate, wanting, who would be opponents to stand down, communicating to the citizens, the voters, that your vote doesn't matter, so it's better for you to stay away. Partly, I believe that's the intent of actually doing that. So by then falling into that, or rather by staying away and not participating, we are falling into that, which was designed to be in the first place. I think the appropriate response is to participate as much as possible. It's our constitutional right. It's important for us to express our will as a people, how we want to be governed. It's important for us to make a statement regarding our social contract and how we want it to be respected. Granted, there are many challenges. Granted, given what we are seeing, it's very difficult for the will of the people to find expression, but that should happen when the people have participated. I personally am not an advocate of people staying away, but people organizing to make sure that as much as possible, even under difficult circumstances, ways are found as much as possible for the will of the people to find expression.
How does it find expression in this instance? Over the past few weeks, we have seen rallies being banned, particularly Bindura, where the CCC led by Nelson Chamisa wanted to launch its rally. It was banned. But ZANU-PF has been having rallies everywhere, undisturbed.
Yes. That is what a skilled, uneven, unbalanced political environment looks like. Abuse of the power of incumbency. It's nothing new to Zimbabwe. We have seen it in repressive systems world over throughout history, where any form of dissent and opposition, anything that looks like is not aligned to the agenda of whoever is in power at the moment is attacked left, right, and center. That's what we are seeing. Unfortunately, what it does is that it taints the credibility of the poll. It taints the legitimacy of whoever emerges at the end of the day and says, I'm the victor, right? It makes you a lesser participant, less respectable on the table of nations. I would want to avoid that personally if I were the one in that position,
But all these denials there have been sections of the law being cited, means that the denying of the rally in Bindura, which was also upheld really in some way by Magistrate Miriam Sipa, are legal, using the MOPA Act.
What you want to question yourself is, why is it that these denials are only manifesting on one side? Is the other side complying with everything? right? Has the other side ever been denied? I don't know, highly unlikely. So when you see that the law is being applied on one party and not the other, you have a problem. But let me say this about the law. The law is a double-edged sword, right? The law can be used to build and destroy. It can be used to achieve justice or subvert justice. It can be used to advance rule of law and constitutionalism. It can be used to subvert. It depends with the people. The law is not self-executing. It's executed by the people, our justice sector institutions, our political players. So the law can be manipulated, right? We speak of lawfare, right? Lawfare is the use of the law to suppress dissent, to punish dissent. This is or to prevent dissent. This is exactly what we are seeing, right? Some of the use of that law, the MOPA Act, is wrong. Some of it is misreading that act. Some of it is technically and procedurally incorrect, etc., etc. But even if you remove that aside, let's talk about the spirit of our Constitution and the express tenets of our Constitution. Free political activity, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech. What do we make of this, right? So what we are seeing in my summation is simply an abuse of legal process and justice sector institutions and law enforcement of authorities to suppress, free political activity. I saw a statement which was deemed to be a leaked communication, internal police communication. When I saw it, I thought it was quite refreshing, for the police to recognize that their role is to facilitate and ensure that peace is maintained, as opposed to being used as, as pawns in a political game to disrupt the environment. I thought that was quite a refreshing communication. I thought the police have understood what their role is. Unfortunately, it does seem like the bannings or the stopping of certain, assembling is continuing, unfortunately. Yeah.
I think I want to to appreciate your. You look at the aspect of saying you can't boycott elections, but you are still going into an election that you're most likely going to be defeated because you are playing in this field that is not, not conducive. The analyzable and searchable voters' roll has only just been released after I don't know how many weeks that it was supposed to be released. Yeah. People have been going to court just to get something that is provided for at law. And why bother? I mean, honestly.
Yeah. Participation is a constitutional right. Participation is required by the Constitution. We participate as a matter of principle, right? How else do we claim at the end of the day that the space was not conducive if we do not participate and we collect the evidence, right? We must collect the evidence. It's the same argument that, you lawyers or you human rights lawyers, you keep going to the courts, but you claim that justice is not being served even. Why do you do that? We go there because it's the peaceful way that we have to get disputes resolved. We do it as a matter of principle. We do it because we actually want it to work. We actually desire to see our justice system work. We actually desire to see our elections work. That's why we go there. There's a danger, blessed, if we do not make elections work in this country. Let me say this. Elections here have yielded the same outcomes for over 43 years, right? Same problems. Same problem-causing factors that were there in 2018, 2013, 2008. We have them in this election. Now, if elections don't work, people will start thinking of alternative ways, right, of making their voices heard, of having their will expressed. That alternative is not attractive, right? That alternative is revolution. That alternative is coups. We have seen it elsewhere. We are students of history. We want to avoid this. How do we avoid that? We push as much as we can with all our might to make sure that elections work. That is why we encourage that there is participation, peaceful participation. That is why we encourage that the authorities should make sure that the elections actually deliver the will of the people. Because if they continuously don't deliver, at some point, the people will have other thoughts. It will be ugly. We want to avoid that.
You say you want our courts to work. Are they not working?
Right. So you have this thing that is called performing democracy, smoke screens. Zimbabwe is one excellent example of that. Best institutions. You look at our constitution, the courts, the independent commissions, the executive, the legislature is given its role, civil society is given its role. That's our framing of the constitution, even if you go to legislation. Practice is one thing. And what really matters in constitutionalism is not what the constitution says. It's what actually happens in practice. Right? That's constitutionalism, what happens in practice. So you have the courts, right? You have the Judicial Service Commission, you have the National Prosecuting Authority, you have the police. In practice, in theory, it works. It's all structured. But then you have extra legal influences that come in that hinder the effectiveness, independent effectiveness of those institutions. In this country, there's a lot of interference in judicial processes. One or two things will affect you: political interference or corruption. If you are dealing with non-political cases or non-human rights related cases, usually our courts seem to have a certain level of independence. But unfortunately, corruption will affect you. The level of corruption in our courts, blessed, is shocking. It's deeper than what the normal person on the street can understand or perceive. But if you are dealing with cases that have political undertones or overtones, including human rights related matters, you start entering into the realm of political interference, where instructions are passed from above, where extra legal influences start shaping how things happen. We have people who have been incarcerated, some who are still incarcerated, who really, based on the law and the constitution and common decency, ought not to be incarcerated. We have people who have been in those courts who have committed crimes who really ought to be inside, but they are outside. They are free people. Right? That does not communicate the best of messages to the ordinary citizen regarding how justice works in this country. Right? So justice is differentiated depending on whose house you are coming from, as one singer sang, in Zimbabwe years back. Unfortunately, that's the situation that we have. But we desire to have courts that work, because without a functional dispute resolution system, our constitutionalism is under threat. Our democracy is under threat. Peace is under threat. If you remove structured legal dispute resolution processes, you are allowing room for anarchy. Yeah.
But you say that corruption is deeper in our courts. I mean, do you have any pointers or anything to justify, or this is just as you call it in your field? It's just a bold declaration.
Yeah. Look, those who practice in the courts on a daily basis come across numerous incidences, experiences, etc. Those who are there in the courts, they will not say it, but they know what they do on a daily basis. In practice, private practice, you have lawyers who say they no longer do criminal law. Why? Because of the level of corruption. It starts with the police at the stations, it goes to the prosecutors, it goes to the presiding officers. By the time you get to court, your case is finished. Those kind of things are quite prevalent. And it's mostly cases that have nothing to do with politics, but where cases have political overtones or undertones, you are moving mostly in the realm of interference, political interference. These are the realities of our courts, unfortunately.
Some would argue that the courts have performed their duty perfectly well, and most of you in the civil society have celebrated this when the rulings favor you, and when they don't, you cry foul. Like, for instance, we saw Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri being acquitted and discharged at the end of the state case by the High Court. and some applauded it as delivery of justice.
Yeah. You see, when finally a wrong is corrected, we must celebrate. We celebrate the small wins, right? When something has been done right, we celebrate. But Joanna Mamombe and Cecilia were not supposed to have endured what they endured in the first place, right? To get a High Court judge make a pronouncement years later, right? It's an injustice in the sense that they have suffered all these years for things that they should not have suffered. When that happens, we breathe a sigh of relief, we celebrate. But what's making us celebrate in the first place is because something wrong has happened over years which was not supposed to happen. So let's not lose sight of that. But let me also say, within our courts, governance structures, there are people who are determined to do the right thing, right? There are magistrates and prosecutors and police officers who are determined to do the right thing, even in the midst of all these challenges. So now and again, you get judges, you get magistrates who actually display fidelity to the law and to the law alone, who try under difficult circumstances to make sure that they deliver rulings which are sound, which are in terms of the law. That happens, we celebrate that because that's actually what we want. In the field of human rights, there are certain areas which are considered to be soft areas. Child protection, women's rights. You know, very often you get some really good judgments, brilliant judgments. In the Constitutional Court, we have the Mudzuru judgment, you know, which Chief Justice Malaba penned himself to do with child marriages. Brilliant judgment. We celebrate those, right? So when it comes to issues that are deemed to be soft, you find our courts many times stepping up and doing the right thing. But when it comes to hardcore issues to do with democracy, governance, human rights, corruption, the tone changes. That's a problem. And we must call that out.
How often does the state challenge High Court decisions or appeal against them?
It does happen it does happen quite frequently, actually. And every litigant has a right. Whether you are state or a private litigant, you have a right to appeal to a higher court. What was quite unusual about this Joanna Mamombe publicized intent to appeal is that you don't appeal to the court of public opinion. You appeal to the higher court, right? So there's no need to be releasing statements and attacking a judge who has made a ruling, in my view, scandalizing the court, actually. That was quite an unusual step by the National Prosecuting Authority, to release a statement attacking the judge and saying we are going to appeal or we are going to petition the court again. They know the procedure, they must just do that.
Is this not normal? We saw a statement coming through when you challenged the extension of office of Chief Justice Luke Malaba. In fact, you were called an enemy who has poked the government in the eye, and the government had to react.
Yes, we have seen there was indeed that statement from the Minister of Justice.
How did you feel about it?
Well, for me, I was just doing the right thing, but also I'm not amused by the propaganda and the labeling, and it happens a lot, right? It has become common practice, unfortunately. It should be abnormal, but it has become normal, right? We have seen those statements now and again. It should not be like that. You know, where there is a cause to be fought before the courts, a litigant should simply go before the courts and plead their case. Statements, press conferences, those are meant to try and intimidate.
But you do that as lawyers representing, those who are accused by the state of doing something wrong. After court, you step up, you address the press and the like. What's wrong with the state doing it?
Well, addressing in terms of giving updates, there's nothing wrong with that. But it becomes wrong when you want to litigate a case in the media, right? You must litigate in court, right? If I step out of court and you come to me and you ask me what happened and I give you a rundown of what happened and I stop there, that's perfectly normal. The state can do that. Private citizens, litigants can do that, lawyers can do that, prosecutors can do that, right? But we don't fight merits and litigate in the court of public opinion or in the media platforms. That becomes wrong. It becomes wrong more so where we are making attacks, direct attacks against those individuals who have made certain rulings, right? If we want to appeal, we simply appeal using the normal legal process that we all know.
Musa, why do you keep doing what you're doing regardless of all these threats that seem to be targeted towards human rights defenders? Because following, political rallies, statements by politicians, there seem to be a serious attack on human rights defenders. At one rally, the president said, we're going to deal with those lawyers that represent people who have been accused. The Patriotic Act itself has been sharpened and brought into Parliament, especially after calls from ZANU-PF to deal and silence NGOs. In fact, you have been called so many unsavory words, but you continue doing what you're doing. Why?
It's because of the desire to see this society function. It's because of the desire to see everyone's human dignity respected. You see, what happens with human rights violations is that if they are allowed to perpetuate, to continue, the perpetrator will become the victim tomorrow, right? The victim may become the perpetrator tomorrow. It's a vicious cycle. I might think I have power today, so I can oppress and suppress everyone. But tomorrow, things may quickly turn, and in fact, we have seen it in this very country. And we have seen it further afield elsewhere. So it's the desire to prevent that, to avoid that, to do the right thing. Someone must do it, right? Someone amongst us, the 16 million Zimbabweans, someone must do that work if we are to avoid regressing. The opposite, as I said earlier, is ugly. The opposite is anarchy. The opposite is self-help. We want to avoid that. What human rights defenders have done in this country over the decades is that they have managed to hold the line. Human rights violations continue to happen. Bad things continue to happen. We continue taking many steps backwards. But my honest, considered view is that without the work of human rights defenders in this country, we would be far worse than where we are now. And the worse we get, the closer we are inching towards anarchy. And we do not want that.
Musa, some would say you do this because it pays. We have seen some being accused of looting NGOs and buying expensive homes and expensive cars for themselves, and you're just in it for self-benefit.
Yeah. Well, those sentiments have been there. Private enterprise pays more than being in civil society, right? Speaking for myself, I'm in civil society because of my interest to advance issues of human rights, constitutionalism, and rule of law.
You're a doctor at law?
I am a doctor at law. I have a master's in law from Harvard. I have a first-class law degree. I'm sure I would make more money if I go in private practice. So being here, I'm actually among the poor lawyers, right? So those sentiments have been there, but I think they come from a point of not understanding. In many countries around the world, blessed, being in civil society is not lucrative, right? People may look at Zimbabwe and think, civil society is much better than government or private practice because this is an abnormal economy, right? Cross the border in South Africa, it's better to be in government than in civil society from a pay perspective. Go in the global north, it's better to be in government than in civil society. Private sector, even better, right? So the abnormal situation in Zimbabwe makes us think in a very abnormal and upside down situation, right? We don't get to civil society because it pays. It doesn't pay. It doesn't pay. We do it because of the passion and the desire to have the society correct its wrongs.
You said that the victim at one time can also become the aggressor, and the aggressor at one time, and you said you've seen it happening in this country. In which particular areas have you seen it happening in this country?
When the coup happened in November 2017, some who were ministers in this country became fugitives, right? Some had their homes shelled, right? Some had to cross borders illegally, including our own current president, in the events that led to that. Some are still in faraway lands, they can't step foot in this country right now for fear of being arrested, right? That's a human rights violation. But some of those, perhaps when they were in power, they could not see it. They could not see that when the day turns, when they are no longer in the office that they are in, they'll be at the receiving end.
Do you help those who used to be aggressors?
Absolutely.
Why?
Human rights organizations in Zimbabwe have helped many individuals, including people who were in the ruling system, right, who fell victim to human rights violations. Why? We assist because everyone is entitled to protection. Everyone is entitled to their dignity.
Even if they're testing their own medicine?
Even if they are testing their own medicine, everyone is entitled to protection, right? So for us, our services are apolitical. We don't serve because you're coming from this house or that house. We serve because you are a human being. And where your human rights are violated, you must be protected. That's actually how it must work. The government is the primary duty bearer when it comes to human rights protection. That is how it must protect every citizen and every resident and every human being who finds themselves in these borders. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, Musa, as we wrap up and as we close, it would be unfair for us to conclude this this discussion without talking about the Nyatsime murder and the incarceration of Job Sikala. Now, I understand that the NGO forum was involved in assisting those who were arrested in Nyatsime. Can you just give us a brief rundown on that?
Yeah, indeed. The Nyatsime incident is one very unfortunate recent incident that we have had as a country. It tells us many things that is wrong with our society. It tells us what's wrong in terms of violence. It tells us what's wrong in terms of lawfare. It tells us what's wrong in terms of being vindictive. It tells us what's wrong in terms of pursuing, political identity and political goals over the protection of our people. Right? Job Sikala is still in prison today as a result of that Nyatsime incident, over a year later, for doing his job as a lawyer representing the Mo Blessing Ali family. The Mo Blessing Ali family have said they are not going to inter the remains of Mo Blessing Ali until their lawyer is released. The many men who were arrested in that incident last year languished in prison for many months until they eventually got bail. Right? Several bail applications in the Magistrates Court, several bail applications in the High Court, until eventually they were given bail. Right? In circumstances which many of us believe they should not have been held for so long. Even Job Sikala, the charges and the circumstances and the facts and what's transpiring in court, it gives us all reason to believe that he really ought not to be there, right? But it exemplifies issues of lawfare that we were talking about and how the criminal justice system can be manipulated to target. There were skirmishes in Nyatsime, but only people from one side were arrested, right? Some of those who were arrested were actually victims. Their houses burned and they had presented themselves to the police to report. That's when they were termed perpetrators and they were arrested. Some just found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were truck drivers who were transporting mourners and they were arrested, right? There was another recent Nyatsime incident where over 30 men were again arrested over a skirmish that happened in Nyatsime. Again, people from one side of the political fray, they were incarcerated for some weeks. Eventually, they were granted bail. But Nyatsime illustrates what is wrong with our society. But it also illustrates the charged political atmosphere that we have, which I'm really hoping at some point is going to be diffused because it doesn't help anyone.
In the past, we have seen a lot of people being denied bail in the Magistrates Court, but then the moment they go to the High Court has somewhat upheld one of the most important clauses in the Constitution that came to life in 2013, that an accused person is innocent until proven guilty, and they have a right to bail unless they are special circumstances or extenuating circumstances that put the court to deny them bail.
Absolutely. I have many views on that. And you are right. In the past, the way lawfare has worked in the past is that people will be unjustly arrested and detained, go to the magistrate's court, they will be given bail. We graduated, they would go to the magistrate's court, they would be denied bail. They would then approach the High Court, they will be given bail. We have now graduated in a situation where both the High Court and the Magistrates Court are denying bail, and one has to make several bail applications until they are given bail. What you can see is that we are deteriorating further over time. But you are right to say the 2013 Constitution revolutionized the way we approach the question of bail, right? Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Everyone is entitled to their liberty until that liberty has been taken away as a result of a guilty finding. You can only be held pending trial or during trial if there are exceptional circumstances which warrant your deprivation of liberty. But our Constitution did something that was not there in the past. It says everyone is automatically entitled to bail, right? So at your appearance, you are automatically entitled to bail. The person who must actually be asking for your detention is the prosecutor, right? So my view is that the way we actually do it currently is wrong, right? Currently, someone is arrested, detained, they must apply for bail. In terms of our Constitution, you must not apply for bail. You automatically have bail. It's the prosecutor who must apply for your detention. That's not what is happening at the moment, and I think it's a constitutional violation.
You've done something in the past about constitutional violations. Why are you not doing anything about this?
Yeah, you know, ordinarily you don't want to be fighting. Not everything must end up in court, you know, for determination. Court is supposed to be a last resort, right? We are hoping that the authorities take note, the JSC takes note, the prosecution takes note. We have been engaging on these issues, and we will continue to engage, but if we need to litigate, we will. Because what we are doing at the moment, we are inverting the constitutional position. If you are arrested today, you are the one who must apply for bail. But that's not what the Constitution says. It says you are automatically entitled to bail. It's the prosecutor that must say, Blessed must not go home today. He must be detained, and they must give the reasons and the evidence. But for now, there's a reverse onus. He who is arrested and detained must prove why they must be released on bail. That's a reversal of onus, which is a direct violation of our Constitution.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Musa Kika, the director of the NGO Human Rights Forum in Zimbabwe, for having a conversation with us on this very important issue of human rights, of the law, and the credibility of our election, especially on the debate on whether boycotting or not boycotting the election. But before you go, Dr. Musa Kika, a message that you'd want to share with the people of Zimbabwe around anything that you feel important?
Thank you so much. What I would want to say to the people is that Zimbabwe belongs to us. We as Zimbabweans, this is our country, together, collectively. No one is going to come and make Zimbabwe a garden of roses, none but ourselves. It requires us to work. It's a lot of hard work. It requires a lot of commitment, a lot of dedication. It requires us to recognize our shared humanity. It requires us to recognize and elevate what unites us more than what divides us, right? There should be no shame or fear in fighting for what's rightfully ours, for fighting for our space to participate and to live and to breathe, for fighting for the human rights that we are entitled in terms of our Constitution and by virtue of us being human beings, right? In this election, upcoming election, my encouragement is for every Zimbabwean to participate. Even though things may be difficult, things may not be that promising, it's important for everyone to step out and make their voice be heard. Whichever way one wants to express their voice, you are entitled to express your voice and to do that peacefully. Peace is one thing that we should not take for granted. It's important for us to participate and engage each other in a very peaceful way. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Dr. Musa Kika, one of Mwenje Matole's top fans. Outside being a serious human rights defender, as he is a fan of upcoming and budding musicians, he prefers to spend the little that he has promoting young artists and listening to the likes of Mwenje Matole. And what's the other one?
I like Mwenje Matole. I like Gwebedzi, the band, a young upcoming band. For me, music and the arts is an extremely important way through which we express ourselves as a people, through which we build community, through which we build cohesion and peace. So it's not just about entertainment, it's about the value behind the arts. And I'm really hoping that at some point as a nation, we will find value in arts and we will actively promote the arts and what it can do to our own development, our own peace, our own collective security.
I think on that note, we are going to be inviting Gwebedzi, and we are going to allow you to sit in that interview and express your passion for arts. Now, this is the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom, and I, as usual, your host, Dara B. Now, at one point, Morgan Tsvangirai, the late, may his soul rest in peace, he said, I am not going to walk to State House on dead bodies. He refused to attain political power on the blood of innocent Zimbabweans. He pulled out of the 2008 presidential election runoff because it had become a bloodbath. Now Zimbabwe needs peaceful transition. Zimbabwe needs to grow democracy. The tree of liberty in Zimbabwe must not grow on the blood of its citizens. We want a better Zimbabwe. We want an accountable leadership. We want a leadership that has a social contract given to it by its citizens without coercion and force. The 2023 elections, which will be held on August 23, presents Zimbabwe with a unique opportunity to allow its citizens to decide who should lead them. And here on this, the Free Talk, we encourage alternative views. We encourage all people to be heard in proud partnership with our supporters who believe in freedom, liberty, and economic growth, the Frederick Newman Foundation. I'm your host as usual, Dara, with Dr. Musa Kika this evening. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you so much, Blessed. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure, sir.
Chona ika saitanyika